Hi everyone, today's build video is my latest submission to the Diecast Mafia's November Hearse challenge. This was due on the 15th of November, but I was working on a bunch of different things and so I let the deadline slip by me. Anyhow, for this build I'm going to be using this Matchbox 1963 Cadillac ambulance, which is actually one of the first cars I bought for Gaslands long ago, and so it's finally getting its turn. For this build I wanted to use Shadow from Twisted Metal as inspiration. Now, I never was a big fan of Twisted Metal growing up as a kid. I never liked the controls. I much preferred Vigilante 8 instead. Anyway, I did end up playing it a few years back on one of the, I think it was PlayStation Plus. Played the last game that they made in Twisted Metal Black as well, and really enjoyed them. So the first thing I'm going to do is add this Camsol Designs hood pan. Followed by one of their air filters. Next I remove the windshield from the yellow tinted glass piece and then I glued it back in place because I'm going to convert the rear windows into armoured windows. To add to this effect, I cut up some slices of the styrene rod to act as rivets and then glue them into place like so. Next part of this build was to do the two side guns, and here's one I've already built. So to build this, I first cut up some styrene square tube for the weapon mount. For the gun itself I'm using one of these 28mm double barrel shotguns. I bought these a long time ago for my Mega Constructs animations, but they just don't fit in the hands and scale that well, so they just kind of went in the bit box and just stayed there. I trimmed the gun down with my hobby knife, just removing the stock and the trigger mechanism because I only needed the barrel and the body of the gun. And then attach this using some super glue. For the ammo belt I decided to use a piece of zip tie. I've got plenty of these left over because they've got a nice texture to them. So I cut this to length and then trimmed it down widthwise because I wanted it to scale better with the car. I then bend it in shape with my needle nose pliers. And once I'm happy with it, I can attach this to the car. For the front windshield I opt to use some mesh, since I don't have any clear plastic that would fit because of the curved shape. So I cut some mesh roughly to shape and then bend it around the existing windshield to get the correct shape. And then trim off the excess and then super glue this in place. Next, going forward with all my Gaslands builds, I want them to both have an offensive weapon and a defensive weapon. So for this build I'm going to be using this launcher type weapon from the North Star Military Figures Implements of Carnage sprue. The idea being this is either a smoke launcher or a mortar launcher. Next it's time to add a driver, and for this I'm going to be using one of these World War II 172 scale US soldiers that I have. So after an initial test fit, I know it wasn't going to fit, so I removed the lower part of the seat. Followed by removing his feet. Unfortunately I always have to remove the feet with these figures. And then after another test fit, I can see he fits inside perfectly. I take this opportunity to glue the interior piece to the base plate. And then I glue in the driver as well. Next I remove these tabs on the bottom to protect the axles from rough play. Obviously it's been a kid's toy, if it gets stepped on you'll bend the axles, but I remove them because it gives me some more ground clearance, as well as the fact I might want to be putting new axles here, so I might have to sand this down later anyway. For this I use the original wheels to cut a new axle from styrene rod, so I can attach some new wheels to it. I forgot to film this part, but I used some Kenzel design wheels. We have 12mm regular tyre 2, rim 2 on the back, and for the front we have 12mm regular 1, tyre 1, rim 1. And I didn't need to modify the axle, so I was able to use the original axle parts. Next it was time to add some battle damage. So first I start by taking my hobby knife and trying to carve in some bullet holes, which is a little difficult because obviously this is a metal body. I should get some drill bits at some point. I did have one but I broke it because they're very brittle. Next, to make some dents, I take a file and then just use the edge of the file to really file in some deep cuts. And then using the flat side of the file, I try and smooth it out a bit so it looks more like a dent. And finally we get onto the painting. So for the body colour I use some leftover purple that I mixed up for some previous Gaslands builds. I use some Revell Aquacolor light brown for the interior. Since you won't see into the back, I use some Revell matte black to hide the details here. I also do the same for the body, as you won't really see into the back. For the rear windows I use some Revell rust, followed by some dry brushing of some Revell aluminium. I then painted the driver's uniform to match the same colour as the car, and then used some Revell flesh for his skin. Next I paint the engine with some Revell matte black and some Revell light blue for the air filter. I then paint the underside with some Revell rust. For the weapons I use some Revell aluminium on the guns, and then for the launcher at the back and ammo belts I use some Revell steel. In the last installation of Twisted Metal, Shadow has some black flames, but I felt these would be drowned out by the black wash that I usually add to the end of my builds, so instead I opted to use pink and use Revell flesh for this, although I do need a bit more practice painting the flames freehand. I dry brush on some Revell aluminium onto the bumpers and other chrome pieces. For the exhaust I use some Revell bronze. I use some Revell steel to paint the diff and the bottom side of the engine that's moulded into the base plate. Then using a fine brush and some Revell aluminium I paint all the trim chrome pieces. Naturally I use some Revell matte black for the tyres, followed by some Revell steel for the rims. For the lights I use some Revell purple red, and for the headlights I use some Revell beige. I then dry brush a combination of Revell aluminium and Revell steel onto the bullet holes and the dents. And then lastly I used my homemade black wash to blend everything together and give it that really nice gritty wasteland look. And here we have the final results, which I think turned out pretty good. Anyhow, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Please stick around for the glamour shots and the shot animation like usual, and I'll see you all in the next video.